Hello, everyone, and welcome to 3 Steps to Boost Your Career from Job Search to Job Offer. I'm Gloria Blackwell, AAUW Executive Vice President and Chief Program Officer. Lastly, we would like to thank Epic for their generous sponsorship of this webinar today. So let's get started. It's really my pleasure to introduce Brandy Nicole Johnson, who is our speaker today. She is one of our amazing AAUW Fellowships and Grants alumni. She's an award-winning international speaker and a facilitator and career coach. Brandy loves helping women clarify how they want to spend most of their awake hours and increase their compensation in their careers. Prior to transitioning to the technology industry and becoming an entrepreneur, Brandy climbed the ultimate career ladder in the nonprofit sector. She went from intern to executive director in less than a decade, and all before the age of 30. That's pretty impressive, Brandy, I must say. That's pretty impressive. Brandy spent most of her career at the Center for Creative Leadership, which I personally love, a globally ranked, internationally known provider of leadership development, research, and executive education. She's a lifetime member of the Girl Scouts and was the first person of color who led Starting Block's board of directors. In 2016, the Triad Business Journal named Brandy one of the top 40 leaders under 40. And then 2018, AAUW awarded Brandy a career development grant to complete her graduate studies. And we're so pleased to have you as one of our alumni. So Brandy is joining us today to share effective career development strategies to support you in gaining clarity about what's next in your professional career, how to create a targeted job search strategy, and how to maximize your interview performance. All important skills as we're in the workplace, searching for new career opportunities, and certainly ever present during the pandemic as careers are shifting in real time. So welcome, Brandy, and we all look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. I'm so excited to spend the next hour with you all. And I just want to invite you as we go throughout my brief presentation to add questions to the chat as they emerge for you. And as many questions as we can get through today, I want to make the commitment that I will be here to answer them. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. You all know that today is really all about taking an opportunity to think about the 3 steps we need to take to boost our career. So to move from job search to job offer, what are the things that we need to do? So from my perspective, and this is from the perspective of not only being in multiple industries and leading organizations, teams, and boards, many over the last 2 decades or so, but really from my expertise as a career coach of what I've learned from the position of not only being someone who has pursued new professional opportunities, but someone who has been a hiring manager and now is a coach. So from my perspective, today is going to be successful if you understand how you can craft a really strong job search strategy, craft a resume and a brand that gets the results that you want, and that you're able to know how you can truly maximize your interview performance. So let's start with the first key that we believe, or that really I believe, can boost your job search strategy into your next opportunity. And it's really centered around this idea of getting organized. But getting organized through the lens of what kind of clarity do you need? So even before you start your job search, have you really taken an opportunity to evaluate and to consider what is it that you want to do next? And so I've got 3 keys here that can help support you in your way of thinking about how to create a strong job search strategy. So for all of my clients, I highly recommend that it starts with a guided reflection opportunity where you're taking a moment to ask yourself some really hard questions or really some insightful questions that can help you gain greater insight to whatever you envision your next chapter professionally needs to be. There are also some books and some assessments I recommend. So one of my favorite books is The Crossroads of Should and Must by Elle Luna. Elle got me to start thinking about really leaving the shoulds behind and focusing more on what I truly wanted to do, what I felt called to, what I felt compelled to do, rather than what I had learned or I had been conditioned to realize either from my upbringing or where I was located at the time. The final thing I often recommend is taking an assessment. So there are lots of career assessments that can help us learn more about one another, from the Myers-Briggs type indicator to the career leader assessment. All of those assessment findings and even StrengthsFinder can be really insightful as we think about our next chapter and crafting that strong job search strategy. The question that I often invite everyone to consider, that if you're taking notes, I'd invite you to write down in this moment, is when you think about it, in today's time, in 2021, if we are working, most of us, most of the time I find, are spending most of our awake hours at work. So when you think about that reality, whether you're working remotely or searching for a new opportunity, or perhaps you're having to go to the office right now, I want you to take an opportunity to think about this question of how do you want to spend your awake hours, most of your awake hours in your next chapter? What is that for you? And when you have that answer, and I want you to write and capture that down without judgment, take an opportunity to think about how can you turn that into your next professional opportunity? How can what you do for work align so greatly and easily with what it is that you've decided you want to do and what you want to spend most of your awake hours doing? Once you've got that question answered, you've gained greater insight, and you've gotten clarity about what it is you want to do, that often crafts the job search criteria that we need to have and honor as it relates to our job search. So when you've got that criteria that you've established from those questions you took an opportunity to reflect on, from the books that you've read, from the assessment results that you have, I often recommend letting technology do the work of the search for you. So one of the things that we haven't always had in our world, but that still exists for us, especially if we're job searching in 2021 today, is a reality that LinkedIn can be our friend. We can set up job search alerts that show up in our inbox rather than spending hours upon hours looking for new opportunities. We can make it so that through LinkedIn, or perhaps if you're looking for a career or another opportunity in the nonprofit sector, maybe it's Idealist or maybe it's Bridgespan, where new opportunities show up every single week or perhaps every single day, depending on the pace of the alerts in our inbox. So I highly encourage you to let technology do the work of the search for you. And then the final thing I'll recommend as it relates to creating a really strong job search strategy is taking an opportunity to do informational interviews. Informational interviews not only help us build our network, but they're often an opportunity for us to ask for referral, especially if we've made a connection with someone who's connected to an opportunity that we may be interested in pursuing in the future. The next key is about perfecting your resume and your brand. So once you've established that job search criteria, it's really important, I found, to honor that criteria. And we honor that criteria by way of analyzing the opportunities that we're interested in. So let's say a new opportunity shows up in your inbox that you would like to learn more about. Take an opportunity to analyze that job description for keywords. Look into and really think critically about, what is this hiring manager looking for? What problem does this role actually solve? What pain can I help them alleviate if I were to come into that role? And then if you take an opportunity to really highlight those words in the job description, those are the things you want to make sure are reflected in your resume. A lot of people have a lot of pointers around resumes, which I'm not really going to dive into today, but I will say, when it comes to resumes, one of the most critical things you need to do, regardless of what industry you're looking for an opportunity in or what opportunity you're searching for, take an opportunity to quantify your experience. So once you've analyzed that resume, make sure you're using words that are not only in the job description, but that you've taken an opportunity to review your resume word for word, line for line, and that you've quantified everything you can. So whether it be from the money you made a previous company, or the percentage that you saved from an efficiency or productivity perspective, make sure you quantify absolutely everything. The final thing I'll say as it relates to perfecting your resume and brand is take an opportunity to leverage LinkedIn for its power. LinkedIn over the last decade, and especially over the span of the last 5 years, has really changed the ways at which we work and we connect with one another professionally and sometimes even personally. And so with that in mind, I would highly encourage you to make sure you have not only personalized the profile link to your LinkedIn profile, but to make sure you really optimize each section of your LinkedIn profile as well. So thinking about how you can highlight the experience that's in your summary and what you really want to tell people your areas of expertise are, to inviting them to connect with you, whether it be through an email or a direct call for action, or something else that's really important to you based on the season that you've decided that you're in. The third and final key that I have for you today is really around maximizing your interview performance. And honestly, this really comes by way of preparation. So we're able to maximize our interview performance when we take an opportunity to do the work beforehand. Because once we're in the room, and it's literally just an opportunity to deliver the excellence that we would have prepared for beforehand. If you are getting an interview, especially in today's time where we are living through a global pandemic, there is a reason why you were at the table. And so I would encourage every single person here to own that reason. Show them who you truly are. We can do that by way of making sure we have these 3 things on lock that you see captured here. So the first thing I highly recommend is that you do your research about the role's possible compensation long before you show up in the room. Because companies want to make sure there's great alignment between what your expectations might be and what their budget is, I'm finding more and more as a career coach that my clients are asked at the very beginning of the process, what are your expectations? And there are some different ways for you to make sure you're forecasting a number that aligns not only with your needs, but also with what your market value should be for whatever role you're interviewing for. The other thing I highly recommend is to make sure you create an interview guide. So this not only comes by way of being prepared for the interview questions that you could be asked. There are usually some common ones like, tell me more about your professional journey. What are you looking for in your next opportunity? How can you be most helpful to this company and help us solve this particular problem? But you also need to be prepared to tell stories of how you've already done what the role is asking for. So how have you previously demonstrated in your career, or maybe it hasn't been at work, maybe it's been in a team project that you've led, or maybe you led the PTA if you're a parent here. How have you already demonstrated that you are more than capable of doing above and beyond what it is that they might expect of you? Have those stories ready, and then be ready to share those stories through what most people call the STAR format or the STAR model. So the STAR model, again, is an acronym. It stands for situation, task, action, and result. So literally what you'll take an opportunity to do once you've got different stories crafted is you'll take an opportunity to share with whoever is interviewing you, when did this actually take place? So what role, what company, perhaps even what year is this? What were you asked to do? So that's the task at hand, the second part of the STAR model. The third part of the STAR model is centered around this idea of what action did you take? So at that time and at that place where you described that situation, all right, and then you took an opportunity to tell the interviewer what it is that you did, or what really was expected of you, what did you actually do to accomplish that? And then the final part of the STAR model is the R of actually talking about the results. So what were the results of your actions? And if it didn't go well, be prepared to explain what it is that you learned, because it's a good opportunity not only to show empathy, but also the vulnerability and the reality that things don't always go right, and that's okay. The final thing I recommend, and the final key here to getting a job offer that we can level up, is really centered around this idea of taking an opportunity to practice with Loom. And if you're not familiar with Loom, your phone will do. So essentially, once you've crafted that interview guide with possible questions you could be asked and stories you might want to tell throughout that interview, take an opportunity to record yourself. You could even use Zoom for that matter, since all of us are here on Zoom today. Record yourself responding to interview questions and then watch the playback. Not only will that help you be more mindful of your body language, especially given that most interviews are happening remotely now, but then it'll also help calm your anxiety because you'll be more fluid in how you're showing up and what to expect throughout that interview experience. So those are the 3 keys I've found that have been most successful in moving every single client I've had from job search to job offer. If you want to connect with me more outside of today's presentation, I've captured my email as well as my website here. And then I also want to remind you all that we're all here for you with AAUW.org as well as equity at AAUW.org. And so without that, without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and then open the floor for whatever questions we might have in this moment. Gloria?
All right. So thank you, Brandy. Those were such great tips and spot on. And when you mentioned salary negotiation, I would be remiss in not mentioning AAUW's Work Smart and Start Smart salary negotiation and our Work Smart online e-learning course where anyone can have access to learning how to negotiate a fair salary and benefits. And it definitely expands on, the tips that you already gave about the importance of entering into that interview or when you're getting a job offer, making sure that you've done the research, making sure that you've already crafted the answers to the questions, making sure that you've already found yourself a partner to practice with so that you can anticipate some of these questions, because preparation really is key. So thank you so much for that. The participants really sent some really great questions. I see a couple more coming in the box. So the first one is, what's a strategy that you can use to address the gaps in your resume? For example, if there are gaps because you were out of the workforce to start a family, what would you recommend?
In that instance, I usually recommend a couple of things. So one, perhaps you want to send a cover letter to explain the gaps of I, at this time or in this season of my life, from whatever years or months it may have been, you were focused on really caring well for your family in that season. That is something you could do, or you could say you had other personal priorities that you really chose to prioritize and focus on during that time. If you were uncomfortable doing that, and especially because you know the culture of the organization and whether or not they're open to a family or illness or whatever it could be, I also recommend reaching out to someone that you know or perhaps that you don't know. You can do that through LinkedIn to make a connection, to find out how they would recommend you address the gaps and how or if the company is open to gaps. More and more, and especially with the global pandemic, people are recognizing, workplaces are recognizing that gaps happen. So I think I would encourage you, or whoever asked this question or whoever might have this question, to be mindful of that and knowing that it's okay to have a life outside of work. And if they're not in alignment with that, then perhaps it's not a company you want to work for. The third and final thing I'll say is if you use the heading of relevant experience on your resume rather than a full chronological history, that can often be helpful as well, because it lets and indicates to employers that you're only capturing and highlighting the things on your resume that actually align with the opportunity that you're being considered for.
Yeah, all really, really good tips. And also, just because you take time out to be with your family doesn't mean that you're not gaining relevant experience, right? You mentioned that, about you could be leading the PTA or doing other work with, nonprofits or working with the animal rescue, right? There are all these opportunities sitting on a board, using your skills that can be directly applicable to the work, that you're applying for. So next, can you tell us if compensation or earning potential played a role in your transition, in your decision to move out of the nonprofit sector?
If I'm being honest, and I am being honest, it did not, it didn't hurt, but that wasn't my primary focus when I chose to transition. I got to a point, and especially because of my journey, so starting as an intern and then going up to nonprofit CEO in less than a decade and all before 30, quite frankly, I was exhausted. And I wanted to take a sabbatical. And during that sabbatical, I realized not only was I exhausted, but I was pretty burnt out. So I spent about 4 months on my sectional here, eating Chick-fil-A waffle fries and watching Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman on Amazon Prime. And this is just me being honest right now. And so I realized, like, during that time and with the tips that I've just given everyone, especially as it relates to crafting job search criteria, for me, I really started to ask myself this question that I posed today of how did I want to spend my awake hours? And so it wasn't as much about the money as it was, I wanted to do something different. And I got to a moment, because I was burnt out again, where I didn't want nonprofit problems anymore. So throughout my nonprofit career, not only had I been a nonprofit employee, but I also had led boards. I've been on a board 3 times now, and 2 times I was board chair. And I've led organizations through really transformational processes and experiences. And so I don't believe that when we're burned out, in my experience, where we might have been burned isn't usually the place where we can heal. And so because of that, when it came to me being ready to re-enter the workforce, it just so happened that technology so greatly aligned with what I wanted to do next. And also it gave me an opportunity to focus on different things. So now I'm in a different place. I'm in a different season, but I'm still serving in a different capacity for the nonprofits whose mission so greatly align with what I believe I'm called to do, and also what I'm really passionate about.
Absolutely. And so everything that you just said about leading a nonprofit, being on boards, and it clearly demonstrates that you have been incredibly successful at a very young age. And so what do you think is your main secret, or, what was your secret sauce, right, that made you so successful at such a young age?
Ooh, probably prayer. Like, if I'm being really honest, I'm an only child. I was born and raised in North Carolina. I still live here. Grew up not only as an only child, but with both parents who were in positions of service. And so service not only is a legacy in my family, but it was an understanding that we're called to really make the world a better place for the people that surround us and for those that come after us. And so when I think about like what's made me very successful, I've always let that calling and that legacy guide me. In addition to that, I think the other thing that's made me successful is when I thought about work. I graduated, my first degree happened at a time where this country was in the greatest recession that we've ever seen, so 2009 at that particular time. And when that happened, I remember reading something, and the author had made the point of, if you make yourself indispensable, you make it so that they can't imagine the workplace without you, there's something different that happens as it relates to how people see you, but also the experience that you create for others. And so I think that's what's made me really successful. And then also really being driven and determined to show up differently and to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. And that was a tough time. That was a very tough time to graduate.
It was.
I think we're relying on your faith, and becoming a more resilient person was almost paramount in order to get ahead. So we focus a little bit on being young and being able to be successful and thrive, but we also know that in the workplace now we have this fast growing population of people over the age of 50. Who are out in the workforce, trying to get into the workforce, trying to figure out, even over 50, what's the next step in my career. So what kind of advice would you give to folks who are over 50 on how to boost their careers?
Yeah, I think, it's a very interesting time in 2021 in the world of work, because I believe we have 4 generations right now in the world of work. And so all Laura's shaking her head, but the reality is all the different generations need different things. So what my generation, and I'm a millennial, if we want to characterize me in this moment, needs and expects from work is not what Generation Z wants or expects. Like, the reality that I say this about my baby cousins all the time. I played outside, but they watch Ryan on YouTube to determine what toys they should play with. I never even imagined a world like that. And so I think in the same ways that we are different generation to generation, we have to honor that as it relates to work. And so when it comes to this question of how do you boost your career when you're over 50, I'd actually invite anyone here in this to actually consider a different question of what kinds of problems do you want to focus on now that you're over 50, if that's where you are. So it's not about your age. It's really about, based on all the experiences you've had and the time you now have, if you want to be at work or you're looking to do something new, what kinds of problems do you want to solve? And then you can use the same keys that I've shared here today to make sure that's possible. Because again, it's less about how you show up and more about, are you abundantly clear about what it is that you want to do in your next professional chapter? And if so, how can you find the people that you need or the opportunities that you need to make sure you're connected to whatever it is that you want to do? I think whether it be entrepreneurship or you taking an opportunity to lead an organization differently, or perhaps you don't want to lead, perhaps you just simply want to show up and support someone else's leadership. I believe that especially in today's time, and especially as we're living through this global pandemic, there is more opportunity than ever to really explore things that may perhaps be outside of our comfort zone, but we have to be willing to step out on faith and to step out knowing that something is possible, but we have to have the courage in order to pursue that.
That's excellent. That's really excellent. And this is a question that we've all been grappling with. It's the love-hate relationship that we all have with Zoom. And how we've really had to pivot to, not being able to sit across from someone and be able to read their body language and everything. And so much is now happening via Zoom and also over the phone. Mm-hmm. So you think about how people are presenting themselves, what would you say is kind of the best way to present yourself, if whether it's on the phone or it's Zoom, and what are some of those pitfalls that people can avoid?
So I would treat it just like, even though we are interviewing remotely, so via Zoom or on the phone, I would treat it just as if you were going for an in-person interview. I think one of the realities of being at home or being in places right now, and very much most of the world working remotely, is that people understand that life is happening around you and behind you. So if you have a tiny human show up, I know myself as a hiring manager, I've been like, bring them on. Or if they need a snack and you need a minute, like, we can take a break so you can go handle that. Because there's no way, if you've got a tiny human, a child screaming in the background, or an animal who hops on your keyboard, who like spills water all over it, that you're going to be able to continue with me until you handle that. So just knowing that most people show up in the grace of knowing that life is happening around you, I think has created more empathy. But beyond that, if you were like, Brandy, just tell me what I need to do to make sure I'm on my A game, regardless of what happens in my environment. A few things I recommend. One, proper lighting. So they say that when you have an overhead light, that usually washes your complexion and how you show up out. So making sure you're mindful of that. One of the best things you can do is actually put a lamp or a ring light in front of your camera on your computer so that it lights you in all the right places. So that's one thing I recommend. The other thing I recommend is making sure your computer is elevated to whatever your height is. So believe it or not, even though y'all can't tell this today, I'm 5'11", and my computer is sitting on a stand right now. And that's because it sits at a level that I'm really comfortable with, but is also adjusted for my height. If you don't want to purchase a computer stand, find some books or one of those Amazon boxes, because I know that's something else we're doing these days. We're ordering a lot. You can stack some Amazon boxes under your computer and make that happen as well. I'd say the final thing I'd be really mindful of, especially if we're interviewing on Zoom, is making sure you're, again, still showing up as a professional. So in transparency, I put on makeup for this conversation. I didn't have on makeup before that earlier today, but I put on makeup for y'all, right? I knew I was going to be on camera. I knew this was going to be recorded. I wanted to make sure I brought my A game into this conversation. And so the same thing when you're interviewing. We want to show up at our best. We want to look our best. We want to feel our best. And in order to do that, it comes back to that preparation. That's one of the reasons why I recommended making sure you record yourself with Loom or on Zoom long before your interview, so you can go ahead and allow your anxiety to subside, and also so you get good visibility to how you're showing up. Virtual backgrounds are an answer to prayer. I am so glad y'all can't see all of what's happening behind me right now. So let's make sure we leverage those as well. The final thing I'll say about being on the phone, especially, is that you can hear when someone is smiling. So take an opportunity to smile and know that that's okay. Take an opportunity to connect with whoever it is that you're on the phone or on Zoom with. It's okay to have a humanistic moment and to just simply ask, how are you? How's your day going? And then get to the business of the conversation. But I can tell you that smiling helps. and it can be heard and felt.
Really, really great advice. And I think also sometimes when people are on the phone and not on Zoom, they tend to be less, they tend to be more informal and kind of less plugged into the moment of what it is that they're supposed to be doing. There really is something to presenting yourself as though you were in front of that person, for sure. Thank you. So we have a question from a burnt out educator here who really needs a new lane. And I will say utmost respect for teachers and what teachers have had to face during this pandemic. I just, all of my respect goes out to you. And so it's that question about how to pivot to a new field. And more so, obviously, you've been a teacher and an educator, and the translation of that into a new area of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I want to acknowledge that this person knows that they're burned out. And for everybody on this call who may be in a similar place where you are burned out professionally, and perhaps you aren't ready to admit it, but I want you to know that burnout is very real. And I think that it is really important, if we can't acknowledge it, to know that you're not alone in that, and you were not the first person who has arrived at the place of being burnout. I myself have been there twice in my career, and as I said earlier, we do not often heal or stay in the places where we have been burned. And so having the courage not only to name that you are burned out, but to recognize that you may want to explore a different field, a different industry. My tips are very much still the same. Take an opportunity and sit back and really reflect on, what do you think you might want to do next? And even if it is temporary, I remember there was a season of time in my life, Gloria, where it was after I'd left my first professional opportunity, and I was tired, and I also had some personal health things going on at the time. And I took a temp job and counted test books, the end of course test books before the testing season for my local school system. So that paid all the bills, and then it gave me the grace and the space I needed to figure it out. So that's why I said temporary is more than okay, especially if you find you've got bills and perhaps you don't have a partner or someone else in your life who can help support you through that, or perhaps you have other commitments. But give yourself the grace and the space to explore what does long-term look like for you. And know that if you don't pick the next right thing, then start with the first right thing of, okay, I can acknowledge I'm burned out. And if I need to do something because I have financial commitments that I need to honor, what can that be quickly in a place where I haven't been burned, that in a way can give me some room to breathe. And then from there, like I said, coming back to the question of, what do you think you want to spend your awake hours doing? And having the courage to honor that. I think before anyone else can help you, before you schedule all of these informational interviews, where sometimes people do ask, hey, what do you want to do next? Or what are you focused on? It starts with being abundantly clear for yourself and being able to articulate, this is what I really want to focus on. So for me in 2017, when I was leaving the nonprofit sector and really reflecting on that question, it was, in my next chapter, I really want to focus on facilitation and coaching. And so when I started to schedule informational interviews, I just kept repeating that narrative over and over again. And then before I knew it, I had people recommending opportunities to me, showing up on my inbox and saying, hey, Brandy, I saw this. But you first have to have the clarity about what it is you want to do before others can support you in that. So that would be my encouragement there.
Absolutely. Great advice. The next question really is about when you look at job descriptions, and very often there are 10 requirements or 10 qualifications that you need to have, right? And it says, is it possible to get a quote kitchen sink job if you're missing one or two skills and the job is extremely competitive?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the context of kitchen sink, but if you're asking me, should I still apply for the job if I'm missing one or two things? Absolutely. I want you to press submit. So if you've seen something and you're on this call, or maybe you're watching this recording and you're like, I'm missing one or two things that they said that they wanted, guess what? By the time you get enrolled, what they need might have changed anyway, so it doesn't really matter, and I would highly encourage you to apply anyway. I know historically women have a tendency to not apply for opportunities unless they have 100% of what the job is asking for, whereas men do not. And so women on this call, I'm going to encourage you to make a different choice today and to apply anyway. If you do not apply, no one will ever know you are interested. So please apply. Even if you only have half of what they're asking for, apply anyway. I'd say if the job is extremely competitive, this comes down to building relationships. So you can apply and then start to build relationships. So ask for an informational interview with someone in your network or someone who might be connected to someone who knows someone that works at the company. You can do that before or after you apply, but then it comes back to relationship, especially if you find that it's extremely competitive in that way. But at the hallmark and at the heart of it, apply anyway.
Absolutely, because the research is very clear that men will see 2 out of the 10 qualifications and apply, right? And women will have 9 out of 10 and still won't apply for the position. It's very, very clear. So it is important. And also, you might think you don't have all of the skills, but some of those conversations that you have with folks might give you a little more clarity on that, right? Because maybe you've been interpreting something in a different way. A question that we get quite a bit, I talk to people about, is about ageism. And, how do you avoid disclosing your age, which, people clearly try to extrapolate by looking at, the year you graduated from undergrad. What kind of advice would you give people for that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question I get very often. Take the years off. So I just said that, my first degree happened in 2009. I'm willing to go on the record and say that. You can find it in our university yearbook. But the reality is, if that's something that you're concerned about, take the years off. So for me, on my resume right now, if I were to show you a screenshot, you would see that the years are no longer there. So I think taking the years off and also being strategic about what experience you want to highlight in terms of relevant experience you have that aligns with the opportunity that you're applying for or that you believe is transferable is the best way to counteract the bias that can show up as it relates to age.
Good. And so next question is around networking and, the importance of, people always say, it's who you know. That's how you get a job. It's who you know. So what if you don't know anyone, right? So how do you get a job if you don't have those connections?
Yeah. So this is where I think we should be more focused on building relationships in the long term and playing the long game as it relates to building out our professional network. And I say that because there are 2 specific opportunities in my career that I could point back to, and I could say it was because I was focused on long-term relationship building, where when I first reached out about a job I thought I wanted, I didn't get them. And so in the first instance, they actually took the time to not only decline my candidacy, but then they created an opportunity for me. In the second and third instances, now that I'm thinking about it's happened 3 times, it was their first no that led to a yes 2 and 3 years later. So just because they say no the first time doesn't mean that it will always be a no, is the first point I want to make here. But then the second thing that I'd encourage anyone to think about is, if you don't have connections, let's start to build those connections now before you need something. How do you do it? You can do it. Social media can be a double-edged sword, but in this context, it's a beautiful thing. So I would highly encourage you to use LinkedIn to take an opportunity to reach out to people you're interested in connecting with, whether they work at organizations that you think you might want to work for someday, or whether they have a job or they're in a current role that you might be interested in pursuing. Take an opportunity and say, hey, can you spend 15 minutes with me? I'd love to learn more about you and your career journey. I'm thinking about pursuing this in the future, but I want to learn a little bit more before I start to build a strategy about how to get there. And if they are like, not now, but send me your questions via email, then take an opportunity to do that. If they say, I don't have time right now, then follow back up a month later. But just know that the no is simply a delay. It doesn't mean no always. and that sometimes rejection really is protection. Even though it can be painful at the end of the day, rejection provides direction for where it is that we need to be. And so in that season, it just might not be time yet. But just know that when it comes to getting a job without networking connections, it is possible, but building your network before you need something makes it even easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So the next question is around, this is a good question. What are your thoughts on asking for interview feedback after not being offered a position?
I think I would ask specific questions to make sure you're abundantly clear about what it is that you want to get feedback around. So I think employers, and I've seen this with other clients, sometimes they have a policy against giving feedback because of the reality that things could go wrong in the feedback that they give, especially if it hasn't been vetted, because of the nuances and things that can happen as it relates to discrimination throughout a candidacy process. And so with that in mind, I would recommend, if you really want feedback, asking a specific question of someone who met with you to say, is there something that you recommend that I do differently in the future? If I were ever to be considered for another opportunity at this company, when it comes to my candidacy, is there a way that you recommend that I show up differently? I think specific and targeted questions are more likely to receive feedback than the open question of, can you give me some feedback about my interview performance? That way it provides more direction and more air cover for employers, but then also for you.
Great. Is there a way to rebound during an interview if you feel like it's not going well? And if so, how?
I think it comes back to courage of calling out, hey, let me actually reframe what I just said. Or now that I've thought about it, and now that I have more context, perhaps you got more context and that's how you realized that you needed a rebound in that moment. I think I might answer this question differently. I think not only does that show great vulnerability and it takes great courage, but it also helps employers learn that you're agile from a learning perspective, that you have the foresight to recognize where your mistakes might be and where your opportunities might be in evaluating your own performance as well. So I think that's one of the greatest things you can do if you're finding that you need to rebound in real time. If you don't have an opportunity to rebound in real time, and I've done this myself in previous roles and opportunities, you can always send a follow-up email to say, hey, I had an opportunity to think more about our conversation, which I really enjoyed today. And now that I've given more thought to it, this is what I think would be the best way forward. That's perfectly okay too.
Yeah. What's a good strategy for gaining entry into an industry that typically requires industry experience, but an unpaid internship is not an option? Is it possible?
I think in today's time, like an unpaid internship is a hard no for a lot of different reasons, or at least it should be. There needs to be some kind of exchange, in my opinion, no matter what sector you're in, whether it's they're going to give you a stipend for you to pursue professional development, or maybe if it's a nonprofit organization who offers development of some kind, they're allowing you to attend a program, or that you're getting access to their service for free. But I think it's important to make sure there's an exchange. In the context of what do you do if an internship is not an option or an apprenticeship is not an option, I think reaching out to the recruiter to find out how they're building, or someone in talent acquisition to find out how they're building their talent pipeline is probably the first place I would start. Usually recruiters have a good sense as to whether or not that company has an apprenticeship, or perhaps it's a career transition program for those who have no experience but want to transition into whatever industry or role opportunity you're focused on. I think the other thing is we're living into a time where the requirements that were previously had for generations, like when I was growing up, the life prescription was you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have babies, and you take care of your grandkids. That doesn't work in 2021 anymore. In today's time, you can go to trade school and come out making more money than I did at the beginning of my career with my 4-year degree than you could in any other time. You can go to a boot camp that's 12 weeks or 16 weeks, and then within 6 months have a brand new career. And so for whoever has this question, I would encourage you to think about how other people have done it and the way that you're thinking about doing it, and find those people. And also connect with someone in talent acquisition to find out how are they building their pipeline so that they can give you some indicators as to how it is possible. More and more, we're seeing companies go away from the formal education requirements that previous generations have had when it relates to work. And so I'd encourage you to do your research and to lean more into what is this company open to, and is it possible? And quite frankly, in 2021, it is likely that it is.
Right. That's really good. What strategy can I use to explain the change in position in the school district that was due to a restructuring because of budgetary constraints, for example, from an assistant superintendent to director or director to principal?
Yeah, I think be prepared to talk about it in an interview. And it's simply in the way that you just articulated. Because of budgetary constraints, my role was reimagined to serve the needs of my district. And I think you need to stop talking after that. I think we have a tendency to explain past decisions. In my experience, we often have a tendency to explain past decisions that we had no control over. And this completely sounds like it was outside of your control. So let's honor that by being succinct, by being efficient, and by not providing further information than what's needed. Simply just saying, because of budget constraints, my role was reimagined should be enough. Every organization and company should know what that's like in certain seasons and in certain times. And so I think just by leading with that simple statement, being grounded in that and being confident in your delivery of that is all you need to do.
Excellent. This is from Lynn. She says, I want to thank the other exhausted educator. I'm not capable of speaking confidently about myself yet. I'm 8 years away from teaching. I have no references because I've had no career to speak of now. What does one do about not having professional references anymore? It's a good question.
Yeah, I'd be curious, what else are you doing? So where else have you served, or who else can speak to what it is that you've done, even if it's not recent? Or how else have you contributed to the world? So has it been through a volunteer opportunity? Has it been through someone who can speak to your character? At the end of the day, references are about, is there someone in this world who can vouch for the quality of your work and how you show up at work? And whether that actually happened in a workplace or not remains to be seen. But I think that's okay. And it's just about being clear about that up front. And then also being transparent about that if asked. So whether the reference comes from serving on a board or the PTA or a committee or a church group, it doesn't matter. You just need to think really thoughtfully about who can vouch for you and what you have done. And the other thing I would encourage, especially in this instance, is prepare those people. So I can't tell you how often I've gotten calls, and it's not a blind reference check, but it's a reference check where someone put me on their reference list and I didn't know at all that I was listed as their reference. And so I'm not set up for success as the person who needs to deliver an awesome reference, but neither are you, especially if I haven't worked with you in a decade. So make sure that, and this is for everyone, regardless of how recent the reference might be, offer the courtesy of reaching out to your references with information about the role that you are being interviewed for. Give them directions or at least a vision for what it is that it would be helpful for them to speak to. And then also let them know that it's okay to reach out to you if you have any questions. I find that references appreciate the additional context and the additional information. And then it's a win-win for everybody involved. The employer who's calling, the reference who wants to speak highly of you. At least you want to only list those people that only want to do that. And then also you for your candidacy, because hopefully that reference leads to an offer.
Absolutely. I think about how many times people have called me or emailed me for references, and I have no context for the position. And sometimes I don't even know what that person is doing now. And, it really does put you at a disadvantage for sure. All right. Any advice for folks with seemingly political work experience trying to land interviews for jobs that aren't necessarily politics or mission driven? In other words, how much to sugarcoat versus being honest in your application? Context says anti-racist queer studies scholar here with a degree in feminist studies.
Well, when it comes to an application, especially because there's usually a statement at the bottom that says, I certify that all these things are true, do not lie about your work history. When it comes to your resume, there are different ways to spin things based on whatever it is that you're applying for. So I think it's less about what the mission of the organization might have been and more about what did you contribute during your time in said role. And making that abundantly clear. So coming back to quantifying all of your experience. So if you were in politics, well, how many people did you serve? What size budgets did you manage? How much money did you raise? I would imagine might be a key indicator there. And so with that in mind, what I've always known and understood as a hiring manager is if they did it for another company, they could do it here. They simply need an opportunity to learn our culture and to translate that experience. And so can they speak to it in a way that makes me believe that they're ready for what it is that they're asking for, which is very different. That comes back to strong interview performance. And then again, just making sure you're articulating your experience in a way that helps them see that you've already done the work. It just might not have been in a place where they might have understood.
Mm-hmm. Good. So this tracks back to the question about applying for a position anyway, even if you don't meet all the kitchen sink requirements. So do you think that your advice about applying anyway pertains to both the listed job requirements in addition to the preferred qualifications? It's hard not to see the requirements as more firm than the preferences, which seem more like a wish list.
Yeah, well, no, I don't know that a company is ever going to state, or rarely have I seen it ever stated of, if you don't have all of the things, it's okay to apply. Apply anyway. From my perspective, job descriptions are the ideal state. I can't say that any employer gets everything they absolutely want in someone. So we are human. We are imperfect. The reality is you might have most of it, but not all of it. And that's okay, right? And also remember, job descriptions were written by another human. And so because of that, again, what the company might have needed when the role was posted versus the 2 months it probably took to reach out to you in today's time because of the number of applications we're getting in our pipelines might be completely different at that point. So I think being able to speak to your agility of how, again, you see your skills transferring if you really do believe you're a fit. Also knowing that company really well. So don't show up at that interview and not know anything about the company and what they've been up to lately. Make sure you do your research. Make sure you can speak to their products or their mission or their programs or their leadership. I would even recommend, depending on the company or organization, taking an opportunity to read something that one of their leaders have written, perhaps, if that's even happened. But I would say, yes, I would still provide the same counsel and the same recommendation. If you have some of it, go for it. Preferred is preferred. It's a preference. We all have preferences. We have preferences for all the things. But the reality is, those preferences do not mean that you're not qualified, and that they wouldn't still pick you. So again, it comes back to the wisdom of apply anyway, and also understand that if you do not apply, no one will ever know that you are interested, and you won't be considered.
Correct. So when you're thinking about developing your resume or talking about your experience, in your professional experience, how many years do you think people should highlight?
that comes back to analyzing the job description. What are they asking for, right? So if a job description clearly says they're looking for 15 years of experience and I only have 12, I usually apply anyway. If a job description says that they're looking for 5 years of experience and I have 10, I look at what kinds of problems, again, that I'd be solving by taking on that role. How would I be spending my awake hours by way of what I can discern from the job description? And that usually guides me as to whether or not I should apply. But I think in the ways that we capture our experience, again, it comes back to what kind of story do you want to tell by way of your resume? Because a resume only tells one portion of the story. If you're getting an interview, it's because something about your candidacy and how you showed up prior to that interview got you in the door, whether it be a connection that you had, the resume that you submitted, or the research that you did on you before you showed up.
Great. What's your advice to someone who has been offered a job but needs more time than the previously agreed starting date?
Tell the recruiter as soon as possible. Again, in today's time, like I would say that is likely understood. But if you wait until your start date to communicate that, that's likely not appreciated. And I don't know that there would be as much empathy there. But I think reaching out, actually, I would reach out to the hiring manager in that instance rather than the recruiter to let them know, hey, I have this that I need to take care of, or this happened. And then having a conversation with them. Probably a conversation I would recommend having via phone. So perhaps reaching out to them and saying, hey, would there be a time that you and I could connect in the coming days for a brief phone call? And then letting them know this is what's going on. By you doing that, not only does it show and demonstrate that you're transparent, but I would imagine it also starts to build trust.
All right, I think we're going to try to squeeze in one final question.
Okay.
When a writing sample is requested, what should I consider submitting?
What did they ask for? So in this regard, like if they left it very open, then I think you will want to choose something that presents you in a light you want to be known by, and in a light that you want to ask, that you're not afraid to recall if you're asked questions about. If they specifically said, we want a speech, or we want a term paper, or we want a blog post, give them what they asked for and make sure you proofread it before you send it.
Great. Perfect advice. Follow the directions. That's really important. So I want to thank Brandy for presenting all of this valuable advice to our participants, and thank everyone for participating here. I think you've given folks some really great tips, and I think we always get some new information, when we have these kinds of conversations. I want to thank Epic for sponsoring our career boosting webinar. Make sure you check out Brandy's website. I don't know, Brandy, if you want to put the slide up again. It's brandysays.com, Brandy with an I. Just to let you know, we'll have this available on our website in about a week or so. Thanks to the AAUW team for all of your support. Make sure you visit aauw.org to find out about upcoming webinars and other opportunities. You'll be receiving a survey. We'd like to hear your thoughts about the webinar that you just participate in. As always, we encourage everyone to, wear a mask and stay safe. And we're going to give Brandy the last word. I really, really appreciate everything that you have shared with our audience this evening. Some really valuable advice, and we are just so appreciative.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Reach out if there is ever anything that I can do to support you and the next steps in your professional journey. Take care and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.